So as I said in my last video, this is one video in a part of a series. I would recommend you go watch all of the videos in this series first. My last video was specifically on hard magic systems, and I will put it right here. I would go check that out before you watch this video because that will help this make a lot more sense. So if you've already watched it, then let's just get right into this. A soft magic system is, for all intents and purposes, the opposite of a hard magic system. They are two ends on a sliding spectrum. Books can fall pretty much anywhere on the spectrum between hard and soft, but a book cannot be, one magic system, I should say, cannot be both hard and soft. I have not read The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, but I heard it has both a hard and a soft magic system, but they are not the same magic system from what I am aware of. Again, disclaimer, I haven't read that book. It's on the list. Haven't read it, but I think naming is a hard magic system and sympathy is a soft magic system, if I'm not mistaken. I could be, and if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments down below. But one magic system is either hard or it's soft. So either the reader really understands all the rules and limitations of a magic system, or they don't. And there's nothing wrong with either one. I think that both can be really great, really useful, depending on what your intentions are for magic in the book, but they can't exactly serve and or should not exactly serve the same purpose in a book. What I mean by that is, in the first video I talk about Brandon Sanderson's first law of magic. Pretty much, if I'm going to summarize it, you shouldn't be solving conflicts with magic unless your readers understand how that magic works. Otherwise, it just feels so cheap. And without naming names, I did recently, as in within the past 6 months, read a book that is very soft, but uses magic to solve problems, and it was one of those things that I was like, you know, like I had a feeling that the author understood how the magic worked, because we didn't understand the limitations, like the readers, we the readers. I didn't like when they used it to solve conflicts. I mean, it's just that. When you don't understand how a magic works and what magic can or cannot do, when you use it to solve conflicts, it just feels like you wrote yourself into a corner and you didn't know how to get out of it, but hey, wait, this is fantasy, I can just use magic. And it feels cheap. It doesn't feel like your characters are creative and ingenious all on their own, or hardworking, and you don't feel like you're rooting for an underdog. You feel like, well, they have magic. Duh. And then every time there's a conflict in the story after that, you're like, well, why don't they just use magic? Because you don't understand. Maybe they can use magic there. Those are the limitations of magic. But I don't know what they are, and so maybe they can't use it in this scenario because of the limitations, but I don't know that. Me as the reader, I don't know that in a soft magic system. And so it just feels like a plot hole. Does that make sense? So, some examples of a soft magic system are the big one, Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is, you know, the eminent soft magic system. It is the grandfather of fantasy, some may say, me, and it's a soft magic system, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that nowadays there is a trend towards hard magic systems because it's fun and it's interesting and it makes your characters feel super smart when they figure out how to use magic despite its limitations to solve their problems. I love that. I love hard magic systems. I love Brandon Sanderson. You all know by now I love a good hard magic system. But I think that soft magic systems kind of get a bad rap. If done well, they can be super fun. They can just sort of add a fun little spicy taste of ambiance and that sort of thing without being what solves your conflicts. Lord of the Rings is pretty much a perfect example of this. If you haven't read Lord of the Rings, maybe you aren't aware that, you know, pretty much the only main character in Lord of the Rings that can use magic is Gandalf. At least the only character in the Fellowship of the Ring that can use magic in and of himself is Gandalf. There's also the ring, which is magic, but the ring's limitations are super clearly defined. So the ring is a hard magic system. It's not what I'm talking about. Gandalf's magic is super soft. You have literally no idea how it works when you're reading Lord of the Rings. You have no idea what his limitations are, what his powers are. None of it. You don't really know. And you don't have to. Gandalf is super, super, super rarely used by Tolkien to solve the conflicts in the book, which is more or less one of the major reasons that when he wrote the book, he obviously didn't pick to have them use the eagles to fly the ring to Mordor, which is that, like, you know, age-old joke, well, they could have just flown the ring to Mordor. Well, one, there wouldn't be a book, so no. Two, you don't understand how the eagles work all that much, so no, it feels cheap. Like, sure, maybe he could have, but he didn't. Also, there's a whole other thing, I'm not going to get into it. If you think the eagles could have taken them to Mordor, read the books. That's all I'm going to say. But Gandalf does not use his magic at any point to, you know, teleport them over the mountain or through Mordor or whatever, you know. When he uses his magic for the first time, you know, when we first see Gandalf really get into a big, you know, magic fight with the Balrog, he dies, you know, as far, you know, and he's out of the book for like a whole other book. So, you know, Gandalf is just, he does things and we don't know why, because he is not our perspective character. And that's really what is super, super important to understand about soft magic systems versus hard magic systems, is that almost entirely, and this is something that's not addressed in the blog post, but Brandon said in some podcast I listened to him speaking on. If I can find it and I remember what it was, I will link that down below as well. But he talks about how hard magic systems are what usually works best when the main character is a magic user. You want them to be able to use the magic system that you create, so usually a hard magic system is going to be the way you want to go. And you can see this in most more hard magic systems that you read, you know, in A Darker Shade of Magic, and like that whole series by V.E. Schwab, Victoria Schwab. Kel is a magic user. The main character, Kel, is a magic user. Or one of the main characters, one of the characters you get a perspective from. Kel is a magic user. So, he explains how his magic works. Because he's going to use magic to solve his problems, because he's the main character, so you understand how his magic works. So that's the case in Mistborn. Vin is a magic user, so you understand how her magic works. You know, in Way of Kings, the main characters are shard users, and so you understand how shards work. And in soft magic systems, usually magic users are not a perspective character that you get. Right? So Gandalf is not your perspective character. You get Sam, Frodo, the hobbits. You don't get Gandalf's perspective. So they don't care how his magic works. He doesn't use it to help them solve their problems. And when he does use it, he dies to the Balrog. Right? So when Gandalf does use his magic to solve a problem, there are super serious consequences to it, which is, you know, super important in using a soft magic system. If you are going to use magic to solve one of your conflicts, there has to be serious and lasting effects, negative effects to using magic that you don't explain to solve a problem. Because that way it doesn't feel cheap. You feel like you still lost something. They lost Gandalf for like almost an entire book. And there's plenty of things that go wrong for them because Gandalf's not there. The Fellowship breaks up because Gandalf is not there. Right? Because he used the magic to keep them alive when fighting the Balrog. He's not the perspective character at any point, though, so you don't know how magic works. It doesn't matter, you don't need to. He doesn't use it to solve their problems most of the time, and when he does, he dies. So there are some other really good examples of a soft magic system. Another really famous one is George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. I've never read them, but in the show, the magic is always sort of at an arm's reach. We don't understand, like, it's, you know, we don't understand how it works, right? Those are not the characters we follow. Arya, Sansa, Jon, Robb, Ned, Tyrion, Daenerys, none of them use magic. Daenerys rides dragons, but it's not magic, and you understand, like, it's a dragon. You understand how dragons tend to work, right? And you understand how her dragons work, right? Magic that characters that we get the perspective of in A Song of Ice and Fire, the magic is explained enough that we don't feel like it's cheap when it's used. Another example of a soft magic system is The Savior's Champion by Jenna Maressi. Tobias is not the magic user, the Savior is. The Savior is not the perspective character we get in The Savior's Champion. No spoilers, but I do believe that it's going to be a harder magic system in the rest of the series. I'm not gonna say anything about why, because I'm afraid of spoiling that for anybody who is interested in still reading that book and watching this. But that's another great example of a soft magic system. We do not understand how her magic works, how the Savior's magic works. We just know that at times she uses magic. We don't know how it works. Again, there is nothing wrong with hard or soft magic systems. I think both have a place in the market. I think both are perfectly acceptable ways of writing magic. I just think that it's just important to understand if your magic system is hard versus soft will really change the way you use magic in your book, because you cannot use magic in your books that you have not explained to your readers thoroughly to solve your problems unless there are serious, lasting consequences as a result. And those lasting and serious consequences should be clear and visible to the reader. They should not be things that happen off stage, off the pages. Now that I have finished talking about hard and soft magic systems between these two videos, I like to address that there is, like I've hinted at, said before, that this is a sliding scale. Hard and soft magic systems are a spectrum. And again, they are not the entirety of what I think makes up a magic system. I think there's also rational and irrational. I'm going to get into it in future videos. But magic systems are not either only just all the way hard or all the way soft. There are magic systems that fall somewhere in the middle, or magic systems that are harder than others but still hard magic systems. This is true even within Brandon's own corpus of works. So Steelheart is, for example, in the Reckoner series, is what I would say it's still a hard magic system, but I would say Mistborn is harder. I think the rules in Mistborn, as far as I'm aware, are more clearly defined for the reader. This is as of the first books in both of those series, because I tend to be like a first book in a series kind of person and then read more things and then go back to the series. It's very weird, I know. So as far as those first books go, Mistborn has a more clearly defined magic system than Steelheart, but both are still hard magic systems. It's a spectrum. George R.R. Martin's, I think, is harder than Tolkien's magic system, but it's still a soft magic system. And that leads me to the book you are all probably waiting for me to talk about, and that is Harry Potter. Arguably the most famous fantasy book of all time. It's neither. I'll get right to the chase. It is pretty 50-50. There are some things that are super clearly explained in Harry Potter, and she doesn't break those rules. So if somebody dies, they're dead. Right? And that was a really big thing, I remember, after I read the 6th book, is that people thought she was going to break that established rule that she had put into her world very clearly from book 1, is that when somebody dies, there's no way to permanently bring them back from the dead. And she even tantalizes that this is not the case with the whole resurrection stone, and then Dumbledore still stays dead. He dies. And they can't bring him back to life. I wouldn't argue that Harry is not an exception. I don't think he really died so much as was unconscious and like the Horcrux died and it like knocked him out. I don't think he was actually dead. It's not entirely clear if he died, and you want to call that an exception. It's an exception where the rules were really clearly defined for you, right? Why he was able to come back to life when no one else has, right? Sirius didn't come back. Lupin, Dumbledore, Snape, none of those characters ever come back, which is really heartbreaking, obviously. But it's one of those times in which she clearly defines here's a rule, and I'm not going to break it without giving you really, really, really clear, explicit reasons as to why it's different for this one person. But there are other times when she's just like, here's some magic, and you're like, what? And that's fine. It works in that book because it's not magic that, is really super plot relevant or solves conflicts. So it's ambiance. Things like moving pictures, right? She gives you kind of like a sort of explanation in one of the books, like how you develop it or whatever, which doesn't explain how or why the pictures move, and it doesn't matter. The moving pictures are never really there to solve conflict that is incredibly important for Harry, and in fact the fact that the pictures move more often creates conflict. But there are still established rules within this. So you don't understand why the portraits move or how that magic works, but you do understand that they can only move within portraits within the space that the portrait is hung. So Hogwarts pictures can move within Hogwarts or between pictures of themselves in different places. But, so in the 7th book, Sirius's, relative that is a picture is able to move between his picture in Hogwarts, because he was a headmaster, and his picture in Sirius's house, because it's the same person. He cannot, however, take a person from another picture in Hogwarts into the picture in Sirius's house, because that person was not in that picture when it was painted. So those rules are defined, but we don't understand why they're able to move in pictures at all. There's just ambiance magic all about. We don't understand, how Hagrid's parents had him. It is not explained how that worked, and it doesn't really matter because his parentage is conflict, not a resolution. There's plenty of magic she just does not explain, but she doesn't have to because she doesn't use it to solve the conflict. There's enough magic that she does explain, and she explains it when she knows that magic is going to be relevant for that magic system to fit very squarely right in the middle, and that's totally possible. TPL, the Prismatic Legacy, my work in progress, is just like that. I think that this soft, nebulous, but also somewhat hard is really great for YA. I don't think it's the only way to write a magic system for a young adult, but I thought it worked for my first one. I thought of the magic system when the only book I was reading was the Harry Potter series at the time, and although I've grown a lot as a reader, I still really like the magic system that I created, so I kept it, and it's a very 50-50 magic system. There's a lot of things explained. You understand how spells that are plot relevant work, and how magic that is plot relevant and conflict solving works, and then there's some that you just are like, well, yeah, it's just magic, and that's just how it is, and it's nebulous, and I think it adds a good sense of ambiance and wonder and mystery. That is what a hard and a soft magic system is. That's how I see the spectrum working. That's how I think it should play out in writing and in characters and in conflict resolution. But that is still not really all there is to it. There is another axis, as I've said, that is rational versus irrational magic systems. I'm going to get into that in my next 2 videos, so if you are enjoying this 4-part mini-series thing so far, then subscribe down below, like the video, leave a comment, let me know you're liking it. But that's all I've got for you guys today, so until then, get writing. Bye!